I'm Dr. Sarah Olivo.
And I'm Dr. Liz Seidler, and you're listening to College is Fine, Everything's Fine.
Hi, Colleen.
Hi. I'm excited for today. So, Colleen, why don't you introduce yourself and then we can kind of let the listeners know why we were desperate to have you on.
My name is Dr. Colleen Lang. I am a clinical psychologist and the director and founder of a group private practice in Manhattan in Brooklyn called Behavioral Wellness of NYC, or Be Well NYC, where we specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavior therapy.
Also known as the best dressed psychologist in the tri-state
Great
area.
style.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
It really is.
I did not know that.
We say
but
this
I'm
behind
taking
your
it
back
in.
and to your face.
Oh, I love this.
So
I love you guys.
Tune into
That'd be
our
so much
social
fun.
media. You'll see so the stylish face of Dr. Colleen Lang.
Well, yeah, we'll give you some shopping links
right.
with that outfit today.
But we're not here for fashion, guys. And I was lucky to know Colleen. She was my supervisor ages ago. And when Sarah and I were talking about continuing to explore what we know college students struggle with the most is navigating social relationships and dynamics on college campuses, we thought we'd go back. We haven't talked about it in a while, Sarah. We did a social series when we first started the podcast. And one of the things we got feedback is like, how do we kind of handle when we make mistakes socially in college? And Colleen, I've seen you navigate making lots of mistakes very well.
You make
I
so
don't
many and
know.
bounce. That's why we have
I don't know. I don't know what to think of the fact that I've been asked to speak on this topic, other than that you both know I know of it so well, personally and
lived
professionally.
experience.
Right.
Lived
All
experience. We've
all
lived
jokes
this
aside,
experience.
though, Colleen, you're an expert in evidence-based treatments, and Sarah and I have talked about what that means, which essentially means that she knows what she's talking about in terms of skills that you can use to manage some of the negative emotions that come up when we embarrass ourselves, make mistakes, and how to recover, hopefully quickly, so that we don't get stuck in a cycle where, I think we all can get to sometimes where we're worrying about the consequences of something that we've done or said. So,
Yeah. I also think that our earlier series talked a lot about social anxiety, where we're like, it's like a lot of that is just some thoughts you're having in your head. But I do think there are times where we do mess up and there's a repair that needs to be made, and it happens to the best of us. So I think even if you did listen to those early episodes, I'm actually kind of listening here for myself. I'm still learning. Taking
so
notes.
let's brainstorm. I have some things that college students have shared that they either like desperately fear are going to happen when they're in school, or it does happen to them and they really get stuck and feel like they can't recover from. And maybe we can share from our own clinical experience or personal experience. You're right.
Or personal.
This is definitely a personal one for me. And it happened with a client actually this week. Was accidentally texting the wrong person something, or like a group text, and they shared or said something that was judgmental or unkind. Can you guys think of some other examples of some social mistakes that can kind of happen or that are feared?
Oh, sure. I mean, I feel like there is such a range, right, between those sort of social faux pas that are embarrassing and that, make us want to cringe, as we say, up to those where we may worry that we've actually offended someone. And luckily, most fall, I think, in the former category, but, like tripping and falling on your way into a party or down a flight of stairs, or calling somebody by the wrong name, or like accidentally burping in the middle of a story. When a joke doesn't land, things that just bring up that like visceral kind of discomfort.
Or even not even mistakenly texting the wrong group, but sometimes impulsively texting sort of when you're in that hot-headed place. I've certainly learned some lessons about that where I'm like, oh, okay, if I'd waited even 10 minutes. Yeah. And then sometimes I'm like, I don't want to wait. I'm going to do it. I do fall prey to it, but I think some of those impulsive behaviors can get us.
Yeah, it seems like where you it's both like, I wish I would have handled things differently, and maybe there were some consequences to how I handled it, but then also this sometimes exaggerated belief about consequences that maybe are not as big of a deal in reality. Like, for example, like I feel like I shared too much about myself. I don't know that person too well yet. We just met in this class, and maybe we're making predictions that are not necessarily accurate.
Yeah, what are some
Right.
common
Right.
predictions you see when people do make these kind of small, cringeworthy mistakes all the way up to like, oops, I might have ruined a relationship. Like, what about this? Let's start with the small, cringy stuff where it's like we've all done it. It will happen again. What are
Hmm.
some of the thoughts that you see pop up?
So, I mean, I think that, there's a lot of like what we might call post-mortem kind of cognitive things that happen, which is sort of like after the fact when you've gotten home from the party or the next morning, where you start spinning on it and ruminating on it. And the catastrophe that is kind of like associated with that feeling of shame or embarrassment feels like it's, so touchable. Um, where it can make us feel like I mean, the word cringe, right? Like we
Hmm.
want to like crawl in ourselves
Yeah.
or like ruminate or self-flagellate or try to think our way out of it or seek reassurance. So you see a lot of that come up.
Hmm.
Which I would say, regardless of whether or not a sort of social faux pas where it falls on the spectrum of bringing up justified or unjustified kind of shame, those processes are not helpful. Um,
Unless you
so
have a time
oftentimes
machine,
it's
I keep
about,
on thinking like, if we had time
yeah, can't
machines, wouldn't
undo
it be
it.
great? I'm definitely guilty of that. A long time ago,
Oh,
people,
yeah.
when I didn't know the difference really between social anxiety and then that kind of post-mortem social rumination, or I like to think I'm just like swimming around in the memories,
Uh-huh.
Um, I I was sometimes confused because people would be like, "You don't have social anxiety." I'm like, "You're right. I enjoy and go into experiences with a sense of excitement, for the most part, public speaking notwithstanding." Um, but then the next day is when I tend to go back and like give myself a grade or several grades, depending. So I certainly can know how that feels to go back and do that postmortem. And you're right. It just feels like, I mean, before I sort of knew what was happening, I could sit there for hours all day, go back and
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. Oh,
yes.
yeah. Well, it's totally like reinforcing, right? Like
Yeah.
a lot of times it's also the reassurance seeking, right? Calling all the people you know to sort of see how much they hate you or to check in on whether or not they've rejected you. And I think that, like ruminating and reassurance seeking, it might give us a sense of relief or control in those moments that then, of course, accidentally rewards the high anxiety and shame in the first place.
Right.
Um,
Well,
and gets in the
definitely
way of probably feeling real feelings that we need to sit with.
I I talk to a lot of students who will say their version of like reassurance seeking is they'll go and they'll text their friends what they did and get their friends okay or not okay, and then they can
Mhm.
feel better. Yet they do that and they're still talking to me about it a week later. So I'd be curious to see what you would say to
Right.
somebody who does that kind of checking in with others to grade themselves. How long does that work?
Well, first of all, if they're checking in with you a week later, it means that it didn't work when they were doing it sort of like immediately post-mortem. Although yeah, like you said, we all totally understand that urge. I mean, I would say the first step, honestly, is to recognizing that those behaviors don't work as much as we might have an urge to do them. And in fact, they tend to kick up a lot more dirt and end up making us sit in it for longer and without being effective. Um, I mean, and I think that a better response sort of depends, of course, on how justified or unjustified the shame is, because shame is a feeling, makes us feel like it's all a crisis, right? And the reality is, as you know, probably from an episode that you just did on justified versus unjustified shame,
Hmm.
the the response is going to look a little bit different depending. And luckily, justified shame, though obviously real and important, I think tends to be more rare than like statistically more, our mistakes more often than not fall into the sort of causing unjustified shame range. But um, rather than sit and stew and ruminate, if the shame is justified and a mistake has been made that's been more grave, right, such as like really offending someone or really engaging in shameful behavior, then we have to problem solve, which might mean repairing, seeking forgiveness, And if we can't repair or seek forgiveness or regardless, certainly like looking at our behavior, learning and adjusting moving forward and having to accept consequences with grace. I think it's different when the emotions are more unjustified, as in there's like a social faux pas that's made, but there's not a good chance that that group is going to reject you or, that you're going to be excluded from the in crowd or whatever it might be, or lose people's regard who you value.
Uh,
And for that, I think like after you recognize that those processes don't work, we could talk about what does it mean to like own it instead.
Yeah, put your energy where it actually can be helpful.
Colleen, I was going
Exactly.
to say that I love so you've already laid out the map of if you can get to a place to identify if your shame is unjustified or justified, what are your action steps? But even before that, because you were talking about this earlier, what are some of your thoughts on tips too? Because I think a hurdle to even get there is this ruminative process. People just kind of get stuck in thinking about what happened. It's not really helpful. What could college students do if they really are finding themselves replaying the events over and over and over again, usually with intense judgment and fear about consequences?
Other than just stop. That would be the first one. No, I think that where it's unjustified, right? I think that it could be really helpful to remember that these mistakes we make, like honestly, even if I walked into a party and I fell and like rolled, right? That would be humiliating. And I think it's helpful to remember two things. Number one, the people who saw that are not generally thinking about it the same way that we think about it. We see other people's faux pas, and if anything, we notice it, but it's pretty transient. And we are like relieved that it's not us, right? But we certainly aren't harping on it the way that the person who actually engaged in it is. So that's always helpful to remember, I think, that these things pass. But then also for that branch of more unjustified mistakes, sometimes it can be helpful to remember that when the moment of high distress passes, there may actually be a moment you can imagine when you'll laugh about it. I mean, not always, don't get me wrong, definitely not always, but a lot of times. And certainly if you can't laugh about it, that you can imagine a moment where all of your relationships are still going on as is, and sometimes even stronger, like despite this sort of bump in the road.
Yeah,
I
some I think it's helpful occasionally to think about times you've not noticed a friend's kind of social gap or kind of been like, "What? I didn't even notice that." Or that you did, but it's a week later, a month later, and it's not at the top of mind. I do think we have such the that sort of, what do you call it, ace in the sleeve, where it's like people just truly aren't, they have so many other things going on that just the likelihood that this is the focus of all their energy and attention is really small. They're probably much more
right.
focused on something in their own sort of, and kind of a target area of worries, that tends to be themselves, what they've done wrong or right, what they have to do. But
And to
yeah,
summarize that, would you say, Colleen, it's like recognizing that humans tend to overestimate the probability that people are actually noticing or paying attention to aspects of our experience. And then of course
Yes.
we're biased to
Reacting.
thinking that it's really negative.
Well, and it's also like worth remembering that, we tend to be so much more accepting and understanding of the fact that other people are fallible than we are of understanding and accepting ourselves to be fallible. So, like, we get a great
Right.
level of forgiveness usually from other people more than we give it. The other thing I would say is like that I find enormously helpful is that there's a difference between seeking reassurance where you're sort of like, oh my God, this is what I did last night, right? Where you're looking for people to tell you it's okay. And on the other hand, owning it, right? In a more sort of mindful, accepting way where you can just sort of stand up to it and state what you did in fact form without judgment. Sort of like, I tripped and fell when I walked in last night. Or in a more severe case of like, I sent a text message that wasn't mindful and that I can clearly see might have offended people. And in that case, of course, to apologize. I mean, I think there's like a way of stepping up to these things, as uncomfortable, as crazy uncomfortable as it is, that's really important because it's better to feel it than it is to try to like crawl
Right.
our way out of it in all these really ineffective ways.
Yeah, the way you described it like that, it's almost like both are hard. It's just that one sort of prolongs it. It's like a prolonged self-torture
Exactly.
as to the one where you're just like, I need to just kind of swallow the medicine, get it done and get past it so I can grow or move on or whatever I need to do.
Right.
You mentioned humor, and it actually made me think about, I guess, something that only sort of time can show people. I always think about time as just occasionally this gift that you have to wait certain things out to make sure that they come true. You won't know right away whether a social gaffe is gonna, we certainly wouldn't go in and be like, it'll definitely be okay. Everyone's gonna forgive you, right? You have to tolerate some uncertainty about what's gonna happen next. Something I've noticed is the friends who've stuck around, who I am still friends with. Again, I've experienced a lot of grace, as I'm sure we all have in our friendships. And given it.
I have, definitely.
Oh, for sure. But the ones who sort of know me at my most fallible are the people I'm closest to, right? The ones
yeah.
who, and actually, I think part of that is because I was fallible and they were fallible and we got over it or we laughed about it. Like, I think there's
Yep.
in a weird way some bonding that can happen when we all kind of get past those hurdles. I don't know that I get close to people who've never been vulnerable with me or made a mistake. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of vulnerability, right, of being open and accepting, and even to some extent being confident about our fallibility, breeds that. It's like there's a
Mhm.
contagion of it, right? It's like then we get the acceptance, and then we give the acceptance. I mean, and I would like to call it some kind of like, like uh, confident self-deprecation or something, where you are helping other people to also feel comfortable. It's like disarming to sort of humbly own your fallibility and to do it confidently, as if you're not a shameful person as a result of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it feeds on itself.
It reminds me of, I know I've talked about this before, but I'm convinced that everything I work with my clients on, they now just learn on TikTok. They'll come back, they'll text me, they'll be like, Liz,
We don't need these
right.
degrees anymore.
But
we
I'm
really
sure this
don't.
and it might even be a thing, but when my clients was talking about, they're like, do you know what the spotlight effect is? And I was like, I don't know. A lot of psychological things have a lot of different names, but they were essentially talking about, which I think is this egocentric bias that we have, that we think the spotlight is,
It used to be commonly known to happen during
yes,
adolescent
yes.
development, the spot
So
effect. Yeah.
look, see, this is why
Mhm.
Colleen's on, guys. I'm like thinking it's a TikTok trend. But anyway, so what the reason why the client was telling me this was saying that, and they have a lot of anxiety about saying the wrong thing with friends in college. And they had just joined a frat and feel like an outsider. And he was saying to me, like, whenever he says something that he feels like is socially kind of a little bit off, and I do think he's accurately reading, like, even when he tells me some of these things, I'm like, he'll just be like, yikes, or he'll be like, he'll like make these comments that are like so just actually, and what he was describing to me is, I'm going to put the spotlight on me on purpose and acknowledge that I've made a social mistake, as opposed to worrying that the spotlight was on me. It's like I'm in control of the spotlight, right?
Right.
Right.
Preempting it, right?
And I think that is, going back to when you were talking about earlier about like what action steps can we take, whether it's using humor or just calling out the elephant that may be in the room or not. And even when he's unsure, when he does it, he's like, I get like a good response from people. They're either like, yeah, that was stupid. Why'd you say that? Or they just laugh at him. It changes the mood in the room. And then, he goes on without, through the rest of his day.
Yeah, but I think that's certainly sort of like acting our way into acceptance, but also modeling it for other people. I do want to say, I want to make sure that I say that I think that can be hard to do in the moment, right? We were talking about this like
Yeah.
post-mortem sort of owning it. I think you're talking
Yes.
about in the moment owning it, which can be really powerful. And I just want to say that becomes easier actually the more often you commit social
Yeah.
faux pas, which gives us good rationale for sometimes when the tolerance of social faux pas is really low, actually increasing that tolerance through committing social mistakes
Right.
on purpose, right? Because that will not only increase our tolerance, but will also cue us to be able to cope effectively, such as what you just described, Liz, which is kind of beautiful, right?
I
And
do
I
love
think,
that.
I actually think that it could be great to do that, to own it, to put the spotlight on it. It's a different version of spotlight, by the way, than the one I thought you were talking about, but we don't have to get into that. And that was more about self-consciousness. Um, and I also find it helpful, like after we make a social mistake, even though our urges might be like, let me just spend all my time in this moment thinking about how bad that was and try to recover. An accurate way of recovering can be using humor, acting your way back into that acceptance, and then using like give skills, right? Like I find we want to think about ourselves and all our anxiety in that moment. People like people who seem to like them. So we use these what we call give skills, right? Which is be gentle, act interested, validate people, and use an easy manner. So once we've committed a social mistake, we have to remember we have far more social graces actually as humans than we do make mistakes. And so we could kind of get back, grease the wheels again by like focusing on other people and using curiosity about them and just kind of making more genuine human connections that go beyond these moments.
Yeah, it's almost like changing the script a little bit of like that narrative you
Exactly.
have in your head where you're like, oh, I've made a mistake. Now that gets to be like, this is could be an opportunity for me to show someone else some humor, give
Recover.
something to them and recover. I do like the idea of acting before you're feeling it. I mean,
Mm.
we talk about that a lot. And I think that this idea of being able to practice some of this in low stakes situations
Yep.
is a good one. Because yeah, over time it gets easier, but we don't all have, like decades, decades of experience like we do to practice it. So what are some examples of ways you might have somebody practice making a kind of a low stakes social gaffe so that they can practice either their humor or their, kind of fully embracing that
Oh,
moment?
it's so fun. Could be so fun, right? I mean, it kind of depends on, and I don't think we have to get into the nitty gritty on this, but I think it sort of depends on we all have different fears that our social mistakes kind of activate, right? For some people, it's like everybody's going to think I'm stupid, or for other people, it's going to be everybody thinks I'm really bad, or so you would want to choose like behaviors that sort of like play into those fears a little bit, not that they reinforce them, right? But um, so if it's something like everybody's just going to think I'm foolish or awkward, then I might tell somebody if there's a moment of silence at this dinner party, I want you to engage in like really loud consecutive sneezing. And then engage those skills of like, wow, that was awkward. Sorry. Or intentionally call somebody by the wrong name or trip and fall when you walk into the room. Honestly, like that's a big high level one and like don't hurt yourself. But um it would sort of and you could get really creative with people and it tends to be really fun.
Yeah. Well, I've actually worked, especially if I'm working with people who do struggle with social anxiety. I mean, I think if we all do cognitive behavioral therapy with kids or teens or young adults who are anxious, right? We have exposed ourselves to all kinds of social gas because you're out there in the world with your client, maybe doing and modeling some silly mistakes, And so, but I've had people go out before and say, let's take a like a survey, okay? And I'll start. I'm going to go up and ask people some obvious questions, and I want you to tell me what their response is. And they would say, okay, I'm going to guess that, you know, one or two might be nice and friendly about it, but the rest are going to roll their eyes or laugh or be really rude. And we'll go down the street, and this is right. This is not,
Mhm.
some sort of like mom and pop farm town. We're in the middle of the street in Manhattan, and inevitably, 100% of the people are kind, or they'll kind of laugh with me. They'll be like,
That is
store.
amazing.
Yeah. And so and so I think
I
you're right. I
want
mean,
that list of questions, Sarah.
yes, yes. Well, listen, I mean, again, I was taking from my own experience about times where I've maybe not noticed the obvious like record store that was right behind me. I got a record player, so I've been looking at record stores. Um, Anyway, so I'm like, that wasn't from the 80s. That literally was something
It's
I'm
like
doing
what's growing
in
up.
modern day times. So yeah, I think that, and so that's been interesting for me when I started to do the like actual data gathering. I was surprised. I was like, damn, 10 out of 10. I was hoping for maybe
I
8 out
know
of
that's
10.
amazing. That's some good data to present to
Yeah.
back
So
this
maybe
up.
gather your own data.
Guys, I'm mindful of time. Could I summarize a little bit of some stuff you said, Colleen? I
Sure.
really love the idea of giving people steps and ideas of kind of what they can take away from what we've talked about today. So, and then you guys tell me what I did wrong here. But I think the first step is to accept that it's happened. I think a lot of us are like, oh my gosh, like I can't even, like, there's non acceptance of that it
Tolerate
even
this.
happened. So, like, once you've accepted it, it seems like the next step is to really think about this idea. Is it justified or unjustified in terms of the intensity of my emotional reaction? Because it seems like how you're going to handle that in terms of your actions, like the intensity is going to differ, right? Like, I imagine if I'm able to quickly say, I'm making this about me, I'm probably overestimating the likelihood that, anyone noticed that I called Julia Sarah, right? I might just do nothing. But if I said something that was really mean spirited and hurtful and I care about the relationship, I might give a more sincere, heartfelt apology. And then in
Of
between
course.
that, maybe you make a brief, light apology if it really wasn't that justified in terms of the shame, or quickly explain yourself. I get carried away and I talk too much sometimes when I'm really enthusiastic about something. Sorry, I didn't give you space to talk or something. Am I missing anything? What are some other takeaways that you think would be helpful for people to think about?
Well, I just wanted to say that I think that you were actually hitting on something we didn't get totally into, which is like, this is, well, we did, but we didn't. The importance of checking the facts is because, like, there's a spectrum of response
Right.
that you might have, right? There's like the big apology, the little apology, right? And then there's the no apology. So that was important, Liz.
Good.
And I think for those, I think we were kind of talking more about there is the repairing we have to do, right? When it's justified. And when it's unjustified, we talked a little bit about how to reframe those moments to remember that they're not catastrophic, that we're overestimating the probability of people seeing, noticing, thinking, reacting, and also the painful, difficult work of kind of like mindful, emotional experiencing it, and owning it, and using humor to present it with this like sort of confident
Right.
self-deprecation.
Yeah. I also think about that last level of if it is justified. Let's say you go out and you're at a party and you drink way too much and you engage in behaviors X, Y, and Z that you wish you hadn't because the alcohol had taken over, right? And then so
Right.
you go and you yell at somebody or who, whatever. And so the next day you're thinking, oh gosh, or at some point you get to a place and you do make that apology. I think the next part is to say, all right, so now I want to switch some actions, and the next party I go to, I won't engage in that same
Absolutely.
behavior again. People also have their memories tends to rely on like the more recent thing. Okay. So I think having those actions where you can say, okay, this is a chance for a redo, put that as something to kind of, think about, okay, if it's something where I've done the apology, I also might have an action that I
Mm-hmm.
can take that would be a bit of a redo for me and this relationship or this situation. Um, and in the
Right.
meantime, give yourself a lot of self-compassion.
I love that. I mean, yeah, it's like we can redeem ourselves by getting
Yes.
back to what our values are while
Mhm.
also having self-compassion because
Yeah.
we are
I mean,
fallible.
celebrities do it all the time, right? All the time.
Yes,
And
it is
they're just
true.
like
And then
us.
what's in the public eye, and then
And they're
like,
just like us.
we forget about these things and but
Right.
they're not. But
Yeah.
they're not.
I mean, I guess, Colleen, we could talk forever. You're, such a wealth of
Wow.
information. But I hope, my fear always, whenever this happens with any students that I'm working with, is that they're going to like be holed up in their dorm room out of fear that they're going to make a mistake, or they're not going to raise their hand in class. That
Right.
things seem a little bit less dangerous from our conversation today. And, more strategies, I think, than you realize in terms of how to recover from.
Yeah, there's much more room in
Yes.
our relationships
Right.
for redemption.
And much more that we probably could be proud of than ashamed of when we add all of
Yes,
these.
Yes.
exactly. Exactly.
All right, Colleen.
So I will be thinking about all of my faux pas that I performed here in this 30 minutes after, and I'm going to be using those strategies. I'm just going to own them to the two of you afterwards.
And then we've got
You'll let me
used
know
to
if we need a
it.
redo.
And
We barely edit anymore because
and Colleen and her practice are amazing, and they're in New York City. We will share resources linked if you want to find out more about Colleen and her practice in our show notes. I will
Thank
figure
you.
out what spotlight effect I was talking about. Also share that in the show notes.
Or which one maybe I was wrong. Who
right.
knows? It was awesome
Thanks,
to see you guys.
Colleen.
It was
Thanks
really
so
fun.
much.
Oh,
Thank you to our guests for sharing their stories and their advice. This podcast is for college students, and we want input by college students, so please reach out by text, email, or voice memo to collegesfinepodcast@gmail.com or 929-500-2231. Tell us your story, give us tips on topics you'd like to hear, or give us feedback about an episode.
Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at College is Fine Podcast for episode announcements and resources. And last but not least, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast. Every hit of that plus button helps us keep going.